Hello and welcome to episode 304 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, I was wrong.
About what?
Oh, I thought I was apologizing to my wife for a second there. I was wrong about how Chinese automakers will deploy to Canada. It turns out it's a full-on invasion of North America, or at least North America, since they're already in Mexico.
Countries across Southeast Asia are struggling amid fuel shortages caused by the Iran war. Fuel is so scarce they're even halting cremations. But no word yet on the fate of the flame-broiled Whopper.
That's what they're going to call my corpse when they cremate me. For the first time, I've begun seriously shopping for a Chinese EV. Since podcasting isn't lucrative if you're doing it outside the manosphere like we are, I might look for budget EVs that aren't available at the market right now. We'll look at several of the lower-end Chinese models from BYD, likely to be in Canadian showrooms in mere months.
Australia has struck a free trade deal with the European Union to eliminate tariffs on most items. Now the EU can freely export electric vehicles to Australia, and Australia can freely export all those poisonous snakes and spiders they have there. I think the EU got played.
I do too. All that and more in this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also coming up, the cost to replace an entire batteries in EVs is set to fall even further by 2030, even though they do last the life of the vehicle. And a study with huge news, solar panels don't degrade nearly as fast as we once thought, once being last week. We could see warranties go from the current 25 years to maybe even 35 years soon. And that, of course, reduces the cost of solar even more, making it even more unstoppable.
All right, so quickly this week, I know most of our listeners are not local, but this is a message for anybody local. We're here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I've got a film screening coming up this weekend. So if you're listening to this in the few days after it's released and you're local, you may want to come. It's Saturday morning, 11 a.m. at the Kramer IMAX Theater in Regina. And I'm going to show an old short film from 1994. I did a 4K restoration of The Weight of the World by film that I made at the Canadian Film Centre. And our friend Lowell Dean has a 4K restoration as well. We've mentioned Lowell before. He made films like Wolf Cop and Die Alone. So lovely morning screening, 11 a.m. on Saturday at the IMAX with some snacks afterward. It's all free. And you're in one of the movies, right?
That's right. I was making cameos in Lowell Dean films going back before he was famous. And this was before he was famous. It was a shot on film, and I was a nervous actor because I did comedy, but I didn't act. And I certainly, when we shot comedy, it wasn't on film.
Yeah.
Where, we don't want to use more money in the film stock if you screw up, because film is expensive.
So did you get it in one take, or how did it go?
It went pretty well. I mostly got anxious about it, started making the producer really nervous, Aaron. And I thought it was funny, so I just kept doing it. And then I lowered her expectations, and then boom, James was James. Magic was created.
No, you're very good in the film. You play a farmer.
You know what, Brian? I wasn't big on the whole zombie thing. I was thinking, no, how do they walk? What do they do? Like I was not a zombie aficionado at all.
Sure.
This was before the TV shows.
Sure, Walking Dead,
and all that. And I just hadn't consumed those movies, and like some people had. So I didn't know how to be a zombie, but I figured it out.
Had to teach you to be.
Yeah, it was kind of awkward. It was kind of an awkward thing.
Anyway, it should be a fun time.
Yeah, there's this oil shock going on now because of the war in Iran.
Yeah.
And in previous oil shocks, we've had some before. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I think was the last oil shock where prices shot up. Here's my hot take on this. We are in a different position even from 2022 than we are now for EVs. You're more likely in most places of the world to see your neighbor have an EV or them going down the street in your neighborhood. They are common. There's a lot more model selection. If you're in North America, we had a model selection problem. There's a lot more brands and models out there to choose from, including cheaper ones. I think that we're in a different place, and it will have a bigger effect, especially the longer it goes on. And we're seeing BYD traffic in their showrooms go up for Chinese EVs.
Yeah, there was a story this week that, electric cars are already displacing, I think it was 1.7 million barrels a day now are not being used already because of electric vehicles. So, it's already having an impact. And of course, every time there's one of these oil shocks, there's now, another option.
Well, thanks for wrecking a story in the lightning round, because I think that was in the lightning round. I'm not sure. It's later in the show. We'll get to that. Yeah, I just want to talk about how I was wrong, because I saw, Canada lowered its tariffs from 100%, actually, I think it was over 100% on Chinese EVs, along with the Biden administration in around 2024, October or something like that, to keep them away from our automakers, because it's so important to our economy here. In Canada and the United States has an integrated auto manufacturing sector in Ontario and mostly in Michigan. And that's really important to our economies. And it was something they wanted to keep away from us because they were making lower priced cars. But then a lot's changed since Mr. T was elected again a second time and has gone after EVs and gone after Canadian auto manufacturing, trying to bring it back to the States. Stellantis did that. This is kind of a reaction to that. I don't think that would happen if the automakers were supported and this wasn't going on with Trump. I don't think it would be lowering the tariffs necessarily, although we do need cheaper EVs to get going. People like me really struggle to find one that works well, but that would help the adoption of EVs. And I think Canada is going to be a beachhead for a North American invasion of China's automakers, which mostly are exporting EVs right now, and some plug-in hybrids as well. But it's also both displace gas and oil, so that's a good thing. And if you're still a doubter about Chinese EVs, I've got a clip for you from Auto Trader UK, where they were examining, the Chinese brands are in the UK. In fact, I think they're doubling since last year, like they're really taking off. This is, a bit of a lengthy clip from Auto Trader UK talking about what's going on at the dealerships there.
In China, EVs are 14% cheaper than internal combustion engine vehicles. I went to have a look at what Chinese brands actually had to offer. This is the Richard Sanders Group dealership in Kettering. In the past, it's a group that specialized in more traditional names, including Renault and Peugeot. But in more recent times, they've gradually embraced Chinese brands, including BYD, JQ, and Omoda. And from my initial impressions with the cars, not only are they very reasonably priced, but also generously spec'd. So Sean, what's so appealing about these brands? What's getting people to come through these doors?
Price point mainly. Price point, the warranty, the look of the vehicle's quality. You get all the quality of the big German brands. Like you get quality, the Land Rover, the looks of them. You get everything but more warranty. You get all the equipment as standard and at half the price.
You seeing Land Rover customers come through here looking for these cars?
Definitely. The first batch of sales we were doing were all to Land Rover customers for the most part. They were getting quite fed up with having small issues and not being repaired straight away. They also weren't too happy with the cost point of them and the interior quality compared to these cars. Half the cost, over double the warranty. Yeah, we just can't fault them really. You get all the equipment as standard, whereas if you went for a higher premium brand, you'd be paying on top of the basic price just to get all these basic things like heated seats.
That brings me to aftercare. What is the aftercare situation like when you buy a JQ or an Omoda?
Very good from what we found. I say you get a 7-year warranty, you get 8 years warranty on the battery on any hybrid or electric cars, up to 100,000 miles total. There's no limitations on mileage in the first few years. But yeah, service and warranty have been very good. You've got Omoda aftercare. You can just call them direct. They seem to be very responsive from what we've found. Parts availability don't seem to be a problem. The service packages are very cheap.
So if I buy a JQ7, for example, and something goes wrong with it, am I being put into an equivalent brand from JQ or Omoda?
From what we've found, we haven't had any of these vehicles come in that the customers had to leave them with us yet. Reliability appears to be very good. We haven't seen a single one come in on the back of a truck, which is always a good sign compared to previous brands I've worked with. Any of the problems that customers have had tend to be sorted on the same day. It could be something as simple as a software update. We haven't seen any actual mechanical failures yet.
Yeah, so that's reliability is a strong testament there. They haven't seen any come in on a tow truck. And I know we know people who've had their Hyundais and Kias and other things towed in because the 12-volt battery was failing. They hadn't worked that out before they went to market. I just think that it's going to be a pretty strong case for them.
Yeah, and they've been making cars in China for not that long, but of course it didn't start out this way. There were issues in the beginning, but very rapidly they have turned it around and seem to be making very, very high quality stuff.
Yeah, because high quality is important to the Chinese market. They don't want to spend money on something that breaks down either. In fact, they're probably more important to them because we're kind of used to crap here. for many years we've had crap. But here's why I was wrong. I thought they would come in, set up shop, say, on the west coast of Canada, Vancouver. It's kind of like the Pacific Northwest in the States. There's lots of EV adoption, lots of desire for them. Lots of EVs on the road when you go there, like they're all over the place. I thought maybe they would have just, because it's only 49,000 that they're letting in at this low tariff rate of 6 point something percent instead of 100%. But no, that's not what they're doing. They are opening 20 stores this year, 3 perhaps in Toronto. They're looking at 3 in Toronto. That's our major city in Canada. It's got many millions of people there. They're also looking at Montreal, which is in Quebec. Quebec has a high EV adoption rate because it's been supported by the government for a time there. So I expect some stores in Quebec. And of course, Vancouver as well. But also they've mentioned Calgary, which is where half my relatives are living and residing right now. And I go there a lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, we don't have major cities as far as Canada goes here, but we are up there. We might see one in Saskatoon. There's a Tesla dealership in Saskatoon and service center. I wouldn't be surprised if one comes to our province. If not by the end of this year, then maybe not too long in the future. This is a really aggressive.
Yeah.
This is not dip your toes in the water to see how things go. This is an aggressive invasion, and this is probably good for EV adoption.
Yeah, a couple of years, it should be pretty widespread, I would think. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
And Sherry Motors is one of the bigger exporters of cars. Some of the brands that they were talking about in the UK there, we don't even, we haven't even mentioned on the show before, but they're there and apparently reliable. So there's lots of things happening. I don't know if Xiaomi will come here, but they've got one of the most popular EVs in the world that the Ford CEO was driving, said it was the best car he's ever driven. And, 2 years into that cycle, they've updated that car. It took them 2 years to do a major update to that car. So that's how fast things are moving. And yeah, this affects the United States because we're right next door, more so than Mexico, because we have pretty significant trade with the United States as well. But we are culturally the same, same language and similar culture, and things that happen here tend to be a threat to them. So we'll see when this gets on the U.S. federal government's radar and they start freaking out and squirming about this.
Yeah, the major difference is we say Z and they say Z.
That's a big one. And not everyone has a gun. For instance, you don't have a gun for your podcast.
Yes, although, Michael Moore, in one of his documentaries, he sort of investigated, and there's more guns in Canada than you would think, but there's just a different culture around them.
They're mostly hunting. There's a lot of wilderness here. And yeah, especially, in more rural places like where we are. So yeah, I see it as a pretty big invasion, and it's pretty significant. We'll be watching this with great interest. And I actually started shopping, I guess I might actually be able to buy one day.
See what might be coming.
What's out there. And we'll look at that a bit later in the show. I also have an update on the data center we talked about last week, because where Brian and I live, we live in maybe a place where you may not expect anything to happen.
Yeah.
As you mentioned last week, no one cares about us. But we live in the prairies of Canada, and they were getting a data center really, mere kilometers from Brian's house, just outside city limits. And last week on the show, I won't play you the clip, but I said, well, Elon Musk is setting up a data center in the southern U.S., and he's putting up gas turbines. At least that isn't happening here. Thank God that's not happening here. Well, it is. It is happening here. They are putting up, because, the details weren't there on day one because nobody asked the questions. I think environmental groups and, the day of our podcast, maybe it's coincidence, but the media started asking questions about that, because the main question is, where does the power come from? When you talk about a data center, that's what it's about. It's about power consumption and water. But no one was asking those questions, and it's still pretty vague. Like they say, the first 100 megawatts will be from the grid, and we can handle that. Then we'll start expanding by building these turbines and a pipeline of gas there. It's just, we're getting a close look at this big issue of data centers because it's happening in our backyard, and it is an issue.
Yeah.
We have a letter here from Derek, or at least a post on our Patreon. He says, I'm hoping with more public pressure, Bell, that's the telecom company that's building the data center, will realize they can do better. Maybe they will partner with some local groups to put solar over their parking lot like I suggested on the show. That was a little bit sarcastic because a data center consumes a lot of power, there's no parking lot in the world big enough to put a significant amount of power from solar panels in there. But I mean, there's not even talking about throwing a single panel up. Like, they just want to make money off of the AI boom and get it going as quickly as possible.
And odd they're doing it here because it's, of course, a lot of dirty power like coal, but also not the cheapest. There's other places that have cheaper power. So weird that they're coming here, but we're going to have a story later about the Lego company that is doing that. They are building a factory and putting panels on the roof. All right, from BBC, Canada prepares for an invasion of Chinese EVs, but Australia, meanwhile, has brokered a free trade deal with the European Union. They're going to eliminate 99% of the tariffs for exports to Australia. This includes things like critical minerals and lithium. But, for our purposes here, EVs is kind of the main part of this story. They've apparently been working on this for 8 years now, and they finally—
That is a long time.
I know, finally announced a settlement on this, and you wonder if the world tensions right now maybe expedited some of this, so they're being forced to think differently, I guess. But this plan is going to save European countries about €1 billion annually in customs duties that they used to pay sending stuff to Australia. So the EU is expecting a pretty big growth, about 52% in the automotive sector over the next decade. So it's just going to be easier for cars to come from the EU to Australia. So right now, in terms of EVs, which is what we care about, the top brands are Tesla, and they already do have Chinese EVs there. BYD, Geely is there. There's also some Hyundai Kia electric cars. So not much of a foothold yet from the European car makers. I'm sure BMW and Mercedes are selling lots of gas-powered cars there, but so far not really EVs. There was previously a 5% tariff on vehicle imports from the EU to Australia. Those are now completely abolished.
Wow.
And then meanwhile, conversely, there were EU tariffs of 4.5% on automotive parts from Australia going to the EU, and those have now been removed. They've relaxed the rules for the Australian luxury car tax for electric vehicles. This was previously set at 91,000 Australian dollars. That's now 120,000 Australian dollars. So a little bit easier to get the luxury EVs to Australia. And beef is part of the deal too. This isn't just electric vehicles, but many, many things. Beef is another one of the big ones that they're going to allow more Australian beef into the EU by 10 times in the next decade. So this is good news for the Australian farmers. They wanted even more than that. European farmers, not so thrilled about it. They were opposed to the increases. But nevertheless, this is a massive, massive deal brokered between the EU and Australia.
The Chinese automakers are building factories in Europe, right?
Yeah.
There's a few of them going up and probably more in the future, as well as battery factories. So that means that they can export those to the Australian market and maybe have it'll encourage more manufacturing perhaps in Europe, but also in Australia, because they'll be able to ship them back. They'll have that European market as, some people are suggesting Canada joins the European Union. There's a few, they might just be trolling Trump, but I think there's a few European officials who said, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Why not?
Can you imagine having a euro? We'll start talking euros now or whatever.
We talk about clean energy, obviously, every week, and many times it seems to move quite slowly, but every once in a while, things seem to move quite quickly, like, the way the Chinese cars are spreading around the world.
Okay, well, let's talk about how I was wrong about that Chinese invasion playing out. BYD is, in fact, storming North America, or at least North America. This was all in a Globe and Mail, that's our national newspaper here, report last week. So everything you read on that in the blogs is all from that Globe and Mail report. They talked to a BYD official. BYD is a Chinese automaker. They are aggressively building ships and trying to export. They can, it wasn't that long ago, a year or two ago, that I was watching reviews of electric vehicles, and somebody that I like on YouTube said, well, maybe we should make PHEVs, these plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, with smaller batteries, so there's more batteries to go along. But it turns out there is no constraint that we know of on batteries. They are churning out, their capacity is much higher than what they're actually making. It's maybe 50% higher.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. Like there's no worry about making EVs. And these batteries will last a long time and be fully recyclable by the time they are ever retired from the car, if the car goes kaput. But they're more like I read a story this morning about a data center that is, what's the name of the recycling company from JB Straub?
Redwood Materials.
Redwood Materials. They're powering a whole data center with, recycled batteries that they weren't going to, they thought these are too good to recycle. There's still enough energy in them. The end of life of your car might have 60 or 70% of that battery even 20 years from now. And that's getting even more increased as batteries get better.
Yeah, and if they're inexpensive because they're coming out of an old car, even if they're only 50% of their capacity, what does it matter? Just keep using them.
BYD is intending to set up roughly 20 dealerships, likely starting in the Toronto area and building out. And Toronto is not a big EV town. If I'm looking for importing a used EV, Toronto's got, there was as bad a market as we are. There's just very few there, and they're expensive because they had no rebates.
Yeah, no, in my recent trips there, that bears that out. Definitely not as many EVs as Vancouver or London or other places I've been lately.
They did have a really good rebate a few years ago, though. I was really generous, and when Doug Ford, the premier, got elected, they took that away, and we knew they would, and we encouraged everyone on the show to buy an EV if you're going to ever buy one. That's gone now, but yeah, Toronto is a statement if you're starting in Toronto and not, it's a bold step. It's going after Canada's big market. And this follows Canada's move to lower the tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles to 6.1%, down from 100% within a specific quota framework. You have to be a certain price of a car. I think some of the cars have to be under a certain price point, not the most expensive ones. But the idea to get the cheaper EVs into the Canadian market. They do prefer standalone dealerships, they said, but they might enter the market using some existing dealer networks to expedite the process. So, yeah, you see Toyota dealer also sells smart cars or, Volkswagens, all kinds of different things.
Like when there's a KFC, Taco Bell, that kind of thing.
Sure. That sort of bastardized hookup. Quota system under a new agreement with China. Canada allows an annual quota of 49,000 EVs in from China, which just EVs, by the way, not even plug-in hybrid, but just EVs. And it's set to rise to maybe 70,000 by 2030. The tariff reduction is from 100% to 6.1%, but only for 49,000 cars, which is something like 5% of our auto market or even less. It's not a lot, but the idea is to get a foothold, to get these cars on the market, to get people trusting them, because it's a process. Even if these cars are as good as the best quality cars in the world, which they may be in some cases, and some cases not, it's going to take a while. Like Korea offered huge warranties on some of their cars. Do you remember that when they came into Canada around 25, 26 years ago or something like that, or even further? They offered big, and the cars weren't great quality either at the time. So you kind of needed that warranty to trust this new automaker. And the warranties are kind of the bumper-to-bumper warranties that you get with a car, like are 3 years on my Chevy Bolt, for example, from GM. They're double that or more on these cars. So there's some exceptions to that long warranty, like the radios aren't covered for that long, apparently, but which are expensive, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, the 7-year warranty. Like we talked about the battery warranties, they're offering lifetime warranties on the functionality of the Blade 2 batteries, BYD is, which is a huge thing if you're worried about an EV battery, which most people are. Even I was. I knew better, but still you have it in the back of your mind and you research and think about it. That gets taken away, but also the bumper-to-bumper warranty gets taken away. The fear of the bumper-to-bumper problems are taken away with a 6 or 7 year warranty, which is longer than most people own their cars for. Most people, it's probably a good idea to own your car longer than that. There's not necessary. There has been a lot of safety improvements in the last, I would say, 15 years. Like I remember stability control was mandatory in 2012, so I waited till then to lease a, because statistically they were in luxury cars and they reduced the death and injury rates very significantly over the 10 years they were in luxury cars. So they made it mandatory for all cars. That's the type of thing I love. I don't think there's a lot of statistics on pre-crash avoidance and, that sort of emergency braking that's in cars now, but I suspect it will help even further. But stability control was a big one. Yeah, so it's happening, and the affordability requirement by 2030, 50% of the quota is reserved for affordable EVs with an import price of 35,000 Canadian or less. That's by 2030. So going forward, the intention is to keep very cheap cars, because there is no car in Canada for $35,000 Canadian as it is. I think the Nissan Leaf, if they came out with the cheap version, which they've delayed, might approach that, but it's not the same. And when you look at apples to apples, one's going to have a better warranty. One's potentially, if it has a Blade 2 battery, a very impressive cold weather battery. I think they should roll those out like crazy in Canada.
Yeah, we've been waiting a long time for affordable EVs in North America, and they've just been creeping down not quickly enough.
So as we've heard earlier, the reviewers have been pleasantly surprised by what they call a top-notch fit and finish of these cars, particularly things like the BYD Seal. This is a more expensive BYD car, but it's also one of the more best-selling ones. It's kind of a competition, I would say, to the Model 3. I think it's a sedan, comparing its interior models favorably to German luxury brands. So this isn't a luxury car. These Chinese brands have luxury brands as well, and some of them are pointing their cars at a luxury level, and some of them have very quiet interiors, especially if you go up the trim on the model. If you get one of the more expensive trims, you get things like double glazing on the glass, and it makes it very, very quiet, which is a luxury feel. There's a good value proposition. The most consistent praise is for the price to feature ratio, which I love. When I bought that Prius, it had everything. It had everything I needed. It didn't have some computer gimmickry, but it had everything, heated seats, safety equipment and all that, a rear camera. Nothing essential was really an add-on.
Yeah, there's nothing more annoying than shopping for a car and realizing that, the base model just doesn't have the features you want.
Yeah, like adaptive cruise control in my Chevy Bolt. They held that back, which was frustrating. Although, when it came down to it, I thought I would miss it, and I didn't really miss it. So, but I thought it was really useful in California freeways when the small town boy was driving California freeways and bumper to bumper traffic. That was an extra,
that's the best
sort of work. It would slow me down. If I had a lapse of a half a second of concentration, which is all it takes. So warranty is double the bumper to bumper warranties of most automakers. 6 years. Other brands outside of BYD have 7. This is in Australia and the UK, some places. And not only that, Brian, but when they give you like a certain amount of years, they'll say so many kilometers per year. So if you use your car a lot, it's not actually 6 or 7 years. It's far less than. But some of these work out to like 31,000 kilometers a year, which is at least 50% more than the higher end of average use. It's the higher end of what my use was. Probably twice what the average actually is in the United States anyway. So that's a lot per year. So if you were buying a car for an Uber or other gig work or taxi company, you would appreciate that extra traffic because you would have a lot of mileage put on your car every year. So the battery warranty is mostly 8 years. It's the same as what other car makers are. But the kilometers in that battery warranty, though, are also higher, which is really important, too. So it's more like a calendar thing for the battery, how far it ages rather than how far it's driven. Entry-level city cars are small for North America. Some of these cars are a bit smaller than I'm sure anyone's going to want, like the BYD Atto 1, which is the Seagull Dolphin Mini. It is often branded as the Dolphin Mini in Latin America and the Atto 1 in Australia. And the estimated price for Canada right now, this is just guessing, and it's not my guess, it's what other people have compiled, is 24,000 to 29,000 Canadian. But this is a very small car that most people won't want. It's smaller than my Bolt, which is already on the small end of what people would want. Maybe like a Chevy Spark EV, a pretty small hatchback.
There is a little bit more of an appetite, I think, for smaller cars in Canada than the US, at least. We tend to have a few more small models be successful here.
Especially in metropolitan areas, in agricultural areas, less so, and in high snow areas, less so. The BYD Dolphin, that's a compact hatchback, and a step up in size and range from the Seagull. It's estimated at $28,000 to $37,000 Canadian, which would still put it in the cheapest of EVs. Now, keep in mind that you're not getting the $5,000 off the federal government here. for the Chinese models, they're not going to be giving that. We have a new $5,000 rebate, which is going to start to go down pretty quick, which is putting pressure on me to get away from that Chevy Bolt EV sooner than later, but I don't know if I can do it. The BYD Atto 2, also called the Yuan Up, a new compact SUV slotting between the Dolphin and the Atto 3. The estimated price, 30 to 34,000 Canadian, which might be a popular model, but one of the most popular models is the Atto 3, the primary global export model for BYD. It's offering a balance of range and interior space, and it's going to be 37 to 48,000 Canadian. Now, it hasn't officially got these new batteries with the lifetime warranties, and it works at minus 30 as well as it does at room temperature pretty much, only slightly worse. We need those here, and we need if you threw one of those, I think they filed the patents to put them in, but they haven't announced it yet, so we might see those in Atto 3s. And that could be a very popular car because it fits in what we like to drive here, at least a compact SUV and bigger, especially with a little bit more clearance. It's easier to get in and out if you're older, and it clears the snow if you live in a snow region. The BYD Seal is a high-tech electric sports sedan like the Model 3, built to compete with the Model 3. 0 to 60 miles per hour in as little as 3.6 seconds. That is fast. There are faster, but that is fast. The estimated price, 45 to 58,000 Canadian. I think that's a few thousand less than the Model 3 is currently selling for here. So it would compete with that and maybe be a bit cheaper. What's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of pressure on the North American automotive companies, including Tesla. And that's going to, I think it's eventually going to put some of them out of business. But it's really, in the short term, it's going to, kick their ass on the EV side and make them price more competitively, get their crap together to sell more vehicles, because they're going to be forced, at least in Canada, to sell some amount of EVs. And if everyone is saying, okay, when it comes to EVs, if I want one, I'm going with the Chinese brands because they're at least cheaper, they're more, the warranty. So that's going to be a competition there that's going to kick the butts, and we'll see what happens with that. But it should be interesting to watch. The Sea Lion 7 is a mid-size performance SUV that bridges the gap between the Atto 3 and the Tang. The estimated price is all the way up to 49 to 55,000 Canadians. It's not announced to have the Blade 2, but it's expected to get that Blade 2 battery. I think they should just go Blade 2 all the way. Every Canadian, even if you live in a warmer climate, is going to be thinking about cold weather performance. Even in the West Coast, where it barely gets to freezing very often, it still affects your range. I think they should go strong with Blade 2 and put them in all their cars. Maybe they will. It might take them a year or two to get to that point. But once they do, other automakers can license those batteries. Tesla was thinking about using BYD batteries at one point. I remember seeing the headline a few years ago. It never happened. It was expected to happen. It never transpired that way. But you can do that, and maybe they can make battery plants in Canada. It's hard to do the Chinese manufacturing the way that they do it in China because they're very good at it there. But if they can translate that manufacturing overseas, which they're trying really hard to do, maybe they make battery plants. And maybe GM buys their batteries, their Blade 2 batteries, if they can't get up to speed. And they're working on their own battery improvements as well. And everybody, of course, as we've said many times, says that they're going to have solid-state batteries, and that's questionable still. Battery warranties are 8 years, but the 72.5 capacity for Blade 2 batteries, that means in 8 years you're guaranteed to have that much capacity left, which is 2.5% higher than they used to be with the last batteries. And with so much batteries going out of the market, so many kinds and improvements, that could improve as well. The Blade 2, as you know, is safer and charges in the cold, retains capacity in the cold down to minus 30 and beyond. Charges faster than competition with the same size battery because it's got a pretty flat charging curve which stays up and stays up, goes up fast and stays there for a large part of the battery charging. So it charges faster than other cars with the same size battery. And with fast charging stations, we'll charge in 5 minutes for several hours of highway driving. And in China, they have lifetime warranties. We'll have to see what they do here. But we'll have to see. It could be determined. It did get down to minus 30s for a little while. I didn't notice it so much because I thought we made it through winter.
Yeah.
But in January, there was like 4 or 5 days where it hit minus 30 at night. But I didn't even notice it because, the electric vehicles, they don't care.
Yeah.
They're heating the batteries if you plug them in, and they're fine.
Yeah. No, we just preheat them and it was great. All right. This is from The Guardian. Oil pressures in Southeast Asia. There was a great conversation on their website, and I thought it was a great explanation. Could probably explain it better than you and I could. So I've set up a few clips here, and I'm going to get into them right away. So this first one explains what the situation is right now in Southeast Asia.
And just explain, Rebecca, why Southeast Asia is being hit so hard and fast in this way, because it is really reliant on energy that passes from the Gulf states through the Strait of Hormuz, isn't it? And that means that countries like Thailand, like the Philippines, are really exposed to this disruption.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They rely on imported energy, and much of it is coming from the Middle East. So the Philippines, for example, depends on it for like 90% of its oil requirements. And then another additional factor is that the picture kind of varies across the region, but some countries don't have very strong reserves. So it's been reported that Vietnam, for example, only has enough energy to cover about 20 days of domestic consumption.
Yeah, that's not a great reserve, only 20 days. So this is a bit of a dire situation. This is Rebecca Radcliffe and Gil Ramos in conversation at The Guardian. So they are undertaking a lot of different energy-saving measures right now in Southeast Asia.
And there must be issues in terms of managing workplaces, right, which demand, air conditioning to make people comfortable.
Lots of governments in the region have encouraged people to work from home. Either they've asked government staff to work from home, or they've been in Vietnam, for example, the government's told businesses to encourage their staff to work from home to try and reduce power burden. Everyone's being told to reduce their AC usage. That's a clear message. In Thailand, officials have been told to wear short sleeve shirts and no neckties unless they're going to an official ceremony, to try and reduce the reliance on air conditioning. And there was some news anchors on Thai TV who took off their jackets on air to try and, illustrate this point. But yeah, as you said, it's very hot in the region right now. It's entering the hottest months, and it's quite hard for people to go completely without air conditioning.
Yeah, so you and I, James, we're going to have to take off our jackets on the podcast so we can stay.
No! I hate taking off jackets.
Your necktie? You're not going to take off your necktie either?
No, I'm wearing a 4-piece suit right now.
Anyway, so as we all know from listening to this podcast, China is going very big in clean energy, and that was also part of this conversation.
And it's interesting about China, isn't it, which has been relatively buffeted, as per some good reporting from our colleague Callum Jones about, China's huge energy reserves, but also its use of alternative technologies such as wind and solar. That means it's able to be buffeted against this impact in that way.
Yeah, and definitely. It's quite interesting that China said it was ready to work with Southeast Asia on energy shortages. And recently, the Philippine Energy Secretary met with the Chinese ambassador to discuss energy cooperation. It's interesting to see whether China can help the region in some way.
Yeah, so as usual, the long-term solution is clean energy. Then you don't have to worry about these kind of oil shocks in the future.
No, and we're going around, people here complaining about high gas prices at the pumps.
Yeah.
Well, a 20-day supply, that's, and Cuba's in the dark. Their food is spoiling. Their jobs are gone because they can't refuel planes to bring tourists in. This is like the BYD thing, there is like the oil shock. I think that we're in a different place now.
Yeah.
We have more knowledge around the world that there are alternatives. There's heat pumps for electricity. There's solar for displacing natural gas, electricity generation. And certainly, the oil that they use in Cuba for generating electricity in places like that can be displaced quite easily with solar and wind.
And part of the story was cremation. They can't get the fuel to burn in funeral homes for cremation. So that's been put on hold. And I imagine they don't have the freezer space either. So, who knows what's going to happen there.
It's a delicate situation.
But just a great example of one of those things you would just never think about, that you might end up getting, screwed in a global oil conflict.
So there is a better way, and people will start looking at that more closely because of this current oil shock that's going on. I want to remind everybody about our email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. All one word, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. I'll have that for you later as well. Also, speakpipe.com if you want to leave us a voicemail message. And our mailbag has been a little empty lately. People have been hesitant to call. At least they're not complaining. At least maybe we're not making mistakes. But anyway, it's time for people to write in and let us know what you're thinking.
All right. So this is a story from Electrek about a building that's going up, not a data center, but it's a Lego factory. This is in Virginia in the U.S., and they're going big. The factory's not complete yet, but they're going to put up a total of 40,000 solar panels with this Lego factory. Do you think they're going to be assembled like Lego? Is that how this is going to work?
The racks will, Brian. The racks
course.
will be all Lego instead of aluminum.
But yeah, the factory's still under construction, but they're going to do 30,000 ground-mounted solar panels, another 10,000 on the roof. I mean, that's a massive roof, like a lot of factories are.
And they should be. It's stupid the factories don't do that. It's stupid that Walmarts and box stores don't do that.
Well,
you have the space, throw them up there, offset your electricity use. It does. The problem is it takes a while to pay off.
Yes.
Depending on where you are.
And just to qualify that, I'm pretty sure Walmart has done that. I think we did a story about...
they've done it in a few places, but how I'm going to get my drone, I want a drone. I want a Clean Energy Show drone. I'm going to go look at all the rooftops. There's no solar there. Yeah. My medical clinic has solar because it's owned by a First Nation.
Yeah.
The building is owned by a First Nation. So they own a few buildings. And what do? They put solar panels up because it makes sense. Yeah. If you have a building, you put solar panels up. It's a business. Yeah. It affects your bottom line. Why wouldn't you do that?
It affects it in a positive way. So yeah, this is going to be 28 megawatts in total at this Lego factory. It might not be enough to power the whole factory, but that's certainly going to cover a lot of it. There's also an office building on the site that is made from mass timber, which we've talked about before. That's a great building material because it stores carbon rather than emitting it. This is a way of keeping that carbon stored in the wood. And so, yeah, interesting story about Lego.
This is why I don't understand about if you set up a AI data center, right? And your main use is electricity and cooling for electricity and for cooling, for powering the process. Why don't you find the cheapest? Like this was the promise of AI data centers was they'll expand renewables, they'll become cheaper. The crypto people said this too, like. They'll have to use the cheapest electricity to make the crypto, so they'll buy more solar and whatnot and wind, and they'll bring the power down or whatever it is. Yeah. Maybe it's nuclear because some data centers are going nuclear, and that will bring down the learning curve of making new nuclear if they do that. But it makes no sense to me. You should be. If I did that, I would say, okay, where am I going to put this? I need a grid connection, sure, but also I need a big field.
Yeah.
I need many acres to put up solar and offset the cost of electricity.
Yeah, and the data centers have just been expanding at a rate faster than we imagined, and I think other people imagined. So, there is a logistical thing of just getting all this done, but an absolute no-brainer if you've got a giant roof.
Well, the Clean Energy Show podcast is made possible by listeners who support us on Patreon. So I encourage everyone to visit patreon.com/cleanenergypod and support this podcast for as little as $1 US per month. And doing so gets you perks like the bonus episodes coming up soon and verbal shout-outs on the podcast coming up soon as well. And, well, we just hope that people will check out our Patreon page because it is the home base for the Clean Energy Show. There is free public posts on there as well as paid posts that are behind a paywall for the people who support us at different levels, including the Clean Club membership levels, which get you the monthly bonus podcast. Coming up next, well, that's the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Solar panels in the United States, Brian, have moved from a 25-year warranty to a 30-year warranty. We'll talk more about why in just a few minutes, but some industry analysts are predicting 35-year warranties soon, which is incredible. That is a long time for a free power to flow in. We'll get to the new study on that soon. Slovenia is limiting gasoline purchase during the recent weeks due to the shortages as a result of the Iran war. People are hoarding gas, even though there seems to be adequate supply, so limiting it to 50 liters. But this isn't happening just where you were talking about. It's happening in various places of the world which don't have their own robust energy systems, and it's affecting them greatly. And I'm sure it's making people think about the alternative, especially when you see your neighbor plug into their house and get electricity cheap, and it never fluctuates, at least not like that. In Venezuela, unmaintained broken oil infrastructure is leaking massive amounts of methane, a greenhouse gas 80 times more powerful than CO2. Doesn't last as long as CO2 in the atmosphere, but it's pretty powerful, and it's directly into the atmosphere leaking. It is the highest emitting oil on Earth, is Venezuelan oil. Stellantis, that is the conglomerate of Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Fiat, and Maserati, have joined Tesla's NACS partners in North America, gaining access to the Tesla supercharging network. What does that mean? If you're a novice, it means they license for free, I believe, the NACS connector, the Tesla connector, which is very elegant and small. Yeah. And once you have that, you can just go to not all, but most Tesla superchargers in North America to charge your vehicle.
Yeah, and I went on a recent road trip and definitely seeing more and more non-Tesla cars charging at those Tesla stations, and that's always fun to see.
It's time for a CES Fast Fact. From a list of 160 products made from oil and gas, I picked out a few of my favorites. By the way, Lego, one of them.
Yeah.
So even though they're using solar panels, they're still using oil to make that plastic. Here they are. This is some of my favorites that are made from oil. Backpacks, cameras, caulking, clothes, cold cream, cortisone, dentures. Imagine having dentures made of oil. Deodorant, detergent, glue, hair coloring, hand lotion, ink, insect repellent, insulation, movie film. A Brian favorite. You shoot on film, you're using oil. Shampoo, shaving cream, toothpaste, vitamin capsules, and yarn. Just some of my favorite things made of oil that are not, just, you don't think about them being made of oil, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Spain and Mexico are going to send humanitarian aid and solar panels to Cuba. This is not new. Humanitarian aid sometimes is in the form of solar panels, because if you have no energy, and we know that what the energy can be used for. The China Automobile Dealers Association said in a report that 55.7% of dealerships lost money last year. That is up 14 points from 2024. If you listen to the podcast on a regular basis, you know that China is a cutthroat market right now for EVs.
And those low prices that we keep talking about, those do have a cost to the manufacturers that they are, hoping to maybe sell at a loss to gain market share, in the early days of getting this all set up. So, we'll see how that plays out.
So the phone maker Xiaomi, they've decided to make a car a couple of years ago. It is one of the most popular EVs in the world. Certainly one of the best reviewed EVs in the world. Yeah, Xiaomi as a whole is making 25%, almost 25% profit on everything. So they made profits on their EVs last year. They're doing a good job with that too. It's one thing to make a good EV. It's another to make a profit on it. So that's important. In 2025, EVs cut oil demand by 1.7 million barrels per day, as mentioned earlier by Brian, who tried to spoil my lightning round. Almost 70% of Iran's exports are that.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's what EVs are cutting out right now for the Pimada Institute. The Arizona desert community of Martinez Lake hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit last week, breaking the record for the highest March temperature ever recorded in the United States.
Yikes.
And there's another heat wave coming, I think, and we'll see if those records hold. Russia's largest oil export terminal, Primorsk, has been blown up. It processes 1 million barrels a day. That's a lot of oil. This will take a significant time to repair, reportedly. And this is Ukraine blowing it up. Trump removed Russian oil sanctions, so Ukraine installed their own. Writes one user on X. Yeah, they took off the sanctions of Russian oil to help the market so that he would be politically popular still in the best way he can, not raise gas prices as much as possible. But Ukraine said, nope. Grid electricity from 4-hour batteries. So this is batteries on the electricity grid, power grids, that hold 4 hours of storage that can power the grid for 4 hours. Costs only $78 per megawatt hour at the end of last year. That is down from $107 a year earlier. That is a huge drop in 1 year. That's according to Bloomberg NEF. It's fallen more than 50% since the eve of the world's last major oil shock when Russia invaded Ukraine in early 2022. So yeah, the battery storage, important part of deploying renewables in the transition.
Yeah, the alternatives are there now in a way that they maybe even weren't in 2022.
BYD shares have surged against market trends as rising oil prices boost EV appeal. I never thought that, you go buy BYD shares as soon as you hear Iran's getting attacked. BYD's Shenzhen-listed shares rose 4.92%. I guess that's one thing that Trump didn't invest in before, 10 minutes before he invaded, because there's a lot of people who have made money off of that. Apparently, this is projected battery replacement costs. Now, you don't need to replace your batteries in your car, so you don't have to worry about that. It's very rare. The warranties are at least 8 years, and generally speaking, if they last that long, there's no defects in them, and they're going to last a long time. Plus, you can also replace part of the battery. You can replace a cell in the battery. You don't have to replace the whole thing if a cell goes bad in the long term. So in the Nissan Leaf, this is a 40 kilowatt hour battery size from a few years ago. In 2022, it cost $9,460 US. In 2025, it was down basically a third to $6,600, and is projected to fall to $3,400 by 2030, the same battery replacement. So that is a third. So when the replacement goes down, the battery, the cost of the battery in the vehicle, which is a huge cost of these EVs, they go down as well.
Yeah, well, we had a story one time where somebody did the math and, like an EV battery today, 30 years ago, that battery would have cost $1 million or something like that.
Yeah. So the BYD Atto 3, which we mentioned on the show here, one of their models would have been $11,825 in 2022, but projected to be just $4,200 by 2030. And, a lot of these things get surpassed. The projections get surpassed because batteries do more than what they expect. So I wouldn't be surprised if things do even better than that. The Porsche Taycan has one of the most expensive batteries on this list. It is the most expensive batteries, about $22,000 in 2022. And even that will be just $7,900, a third of that, basically a third on all these cars by 2030. And finally this week, as we've always mentioned on the show, we've been on the air for more than 6 years now. We always talk about how solar panels degrade by 1% a year. So 25 years with the end of the warranty on a roof, we might have 25% less power production from those same panels. And, that's an unpleasant feeling. But there's a new study that says it's only half of that, Brian. Researchers analyzed 16 years of data, which is a lot of data, from over 1 million PV systems in Germany. PV means photovoltaic, which is another word for solar panels that produce electricity. This was in Germany and found an annual degradation of just 0.52% to 0.61%, roughly half of prior estimates. So environmental factors like heat, frost, and air pollution affect performance, while smaller systems degrade less than larger ones. Boosting long-term reliability and profitability will change the game. Like this is why we are starting to see actually solar farms have a warranty of 30 years. So you say, okay, we invest this money, we get power for 30 years. Yeah. Now they are talking about even moving that from 25 years, a lot of places, to 30 years. Ours are 25.
Yeah.
35 years is something that'll be coming.
Yeah, and we just talked about that Lego factory putting up 40,000 panels. Well, if the degradation is half of what they were expecting, man, that's a huge bonus.
Yes, and you can count on a lot more electricity, and that happens to move solar faster and decarbonize the planet even better than we expected.
All right, well, that's the show for this week. We are on social media at Clean Energy Pod, patreon.com/Clean Energy Pod. The email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, and hit the follow and subscribe button wherever you're listening right now for new episodes every week.
Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, and especially we give a shout out every week to our Clean Club executive members, Green Bastard, Brent Rotley, and Tiernan. And we'll see you all again in 7 days.
See you next week.